Megan McPeak, your favorite Michael K. Williams scene?
I mean, it's got to be the iconic bench one from The Wire with Wendell Prince, if I'm not mistaken.
Wendell
And
Pierce,
just
Bunt.
Michael Wendell Pierce, yes, Wendell Pierce. Sorry. But I mean, like just that iconic, just the character alone, I think is
Yes.
iconic with what he did for Black men and Black gay men in that time, during a time where it was frowned upon. I mean, in today's society, it's still frowned upon, which is ridiculous. But he played that character with such grace and respect to that community and made it his own. And I mean, I don't think there's a scene in any of Omar Little's entirety as that character that you can't love. Like it's every single one. It's the character as a whole, and the way that he played it and the way that he plays any character, I think is just phenomenal. But that scene on the park bench probably is one of the most iconic ones that I can remember.
Yeah, the genius of that character and the way Williams played that character was that he didn't have this big coming out moment as gay. That was just what he was on the show, and they let you figure it out, and then that was that, and you had to deal with it. And all these people that liked Omar because he was this rogue character, but the only like ethically pure person on the show, the only person with a code that he would never violate, was also gay. And if you want to accept that, you had to accept it. And you had to respect him for who he was, even for these other things. If you were like a homophobe, well, I don't like the fact that he's gay. Well, it don't matter because he is the only pure, like, stand-up guy on the whole show. And my favorite Omar scene. And again, it's a tribute to the show and the character, but also the person who played it in the way he did, because no one else could have done this the way Michael K. Williams did. Was obviously this showdown in the alley with Brother Mouzone, and they're talking about each other's guns. And Brother Mouzone said, "Well, I'll shoot you, and when I shoot you in the elbow, you'll jump." And Michael K. Williams said, "At this range, even if I miss, I can't miss." And again, it's not just the character, because the character was brilliant, but you also need the right person to bring that character to life. And, in the clip that RJ shared with us offline, Michael K. Williams there was a few years where he struggled to distinguish between the man and the character, his own identity in the character. But one of the best acting jobs any of us has ever seen. And we lost him over the weekend. Dave Zirin, you got a chance to interview Michael K. Williams. Tell us what that experience was like.
Oh, I will. But first and foremost, just a tip of the hat to also Michael K. Williams' performance as Chalky White on Walk Empire, because an entirely different character from Omar Little, an entirely different set of motivations, and even an entirely different voice that he approximated than Omar Little. And it just gives you a sense of his acting range and brilliance, and just a sense of what we've lost in losing Michael K. Williams. When I interviewed him, he did the entire interview while eating a sandwich. And it was still, it was so brilliant. Because, he was chewing and talking out of the side of his mouth, but it was brilliant because we started to get into it. Because I think at first he was like, oh my goodness, another sort of car wash interview here. But then we started to get into Omar's last name being Little. And I asked him if he ever thought about that connection on Malcolm X, and whether the show was trying to make a statement about who Malcolm Little would have become if not for the intervention of politics and life, if that was a statement. And he hadn't thought of that, but he knew a great deal about Malcolm's history. And so we started to talk about Malcolm X's history when he was Detroit Red, and the connection between that and Omar Little. And he was just so incredibly sharp and incisive. He'd spent so much time thinking about this character that it was like hearing a master's discourse about The Wire and Omar Little. And it was an experience that I'll never forget. And I felt that way before I heard he passed. And certainly that experience means more to me now.
Absolutely, Dave. And again, yeah, it's tough to grapple with like the size of the void that he's going to leave. And this is a year almost to the day after Chadwick Boseman. Like, this is two big losses to such a a small but tight-knit community of people who act at that level. We missed the audience in the week that we were gone, an extra day because it was Labor Day with a capital U here in Canada. But I got to watch a lot of CFL football, so that made me happy. And I wore this shirt. I brought this one back because summer is gone in a flash. Welcome. Welcome back to the Bring It In panel. I don't do this alone. First of all, sorry, let me remind you guys, if you like what you hear from week to week and from minute to minute, you can hit like on YouTube. You can subscribe to CBC Sports Channel. You can leave a comment if you like it. You can interact with us on social media, hashtag Bring It In. We're always open to your in or out suggestions. And if you dislike it, whatever, leave a dislike, leave a nasty comment. We don't care. We're just trying to feed the algorithm. Engagement is king or queen. But I don't do this alone. I do this every week with the best panel in the business. Joining us from Washington, D.C., the author of 10 books with an 11th on the way. And when I say on the way, I mean like in the next couple of weeks. There's an excerpt of this book, The Kaepernick Effect, in Sports Illustrated right now. Dave Zirin, what's up?
Hey, feeling good. Glad to be here. Glad to be back.
When is release date?
September 14th.
Oh, geez. That's like a week from now.
7 days.
Wow. Okay, perfect. All right. Circled on my account. And you know what? Don't send me a copy, Dave. I'm going to buy a copy and get you to sign it when I see you, because as like an author in waiting right now, I've seen book contracts. Every dollar counts. Every copy sold counts. So
the question is, if your name isn't Stephen King, you're not getting rich doing this.
No, not at all. Not at all. I hope to break even when I publish mine. Also joining us from Washington, D.C., the play-by-play voice of the Washington Mystics, the play-by-play voice of the capital city Go-Go, a proud alumna of Humber College, Meghan McPeak.
Go Hawks. Yes, please send us the link, Dave, so that we can make sure that we make our purchases. And I will be sure to make sure that I get mine signed as well.
Yay. That's awesome. Thank y'all.
Perfect. So before we get to book signing, we got an episode to do. We're talking, what are we talking? I think we're actually going to get around to talking tennis this time. Last week, we talked so much about how people don't know poop about boxing. We never got to tennis. We're going to talk hockey because we're an international panel, international cast, but this is CBC, Canada's public broadcaster, and it actually is in our contract that we got to talk hockey. No, it's not actually in our contract, but you know, it's implied that you got to talk hockey every so often. The NHL last week confirmed that NHL players will play in the Winter Olympics in Beijing in 2022. This Olympics is, you know, it's controversial for a lot of reasons. One being that like there's this long-standing tension between this side of the world and China and its human rights records. Two, this pandemic, none of us think the pandemic will be over by then. The NHL has said, cool. Human rights, cool. Pandemic, cool. Mid-season break, cool. Austin Matthews and the crew, get over there and promote our brand. Dave Zirin, how do you feel about the NHL taking this opportunity to promote its brand in a giant market in the middle of a pandemic, despite all the human rights tension between this side of the world and China?
It's a reminder that whether you're talking about sports or any other multi-billion-dollar industry, the phrase is grow or die. Mm-hmm. So from their perspective, China, and this has been true of the perspective on China going back at least 40 years, is that this is the greatest untapped market for consumers in the world. And even as it's starting to be tapped, people saw, like last year, what that means to the NBA, for example, in terms of it being a financial tentpole of the entire operation. And that's clearly what the NHL is striving for. Is it ethical? Of course it's not ethical. But what in sports is ethical at this point? Does China have human rights violations? Absolutely. Is it alone in that regard? Absolutely not. So the NHL makes this kind of devil's calculus where it says, well, we've got these problems, we've got these health risks, but what we also have is an opportunity to grow the sport, and grow or die becomes the ultimate consideration before anything else.
Meghan McPeak, how far have we come since the days when David Stern took a flight to China with a duffel bag full of VHS tapes of NBA games to show to CCTV and potential Chinese sponsors? How far have we come since then?
I think we've come a long way, but everything Dave said is correct. And the NHL, I think the NHL took a page out of what the NBA has done with regards to building the brand globally overseas and utilizing, the Chinese market and utilizing the love that the abroad countries have for the game of basketball. And I think the NHL is trying to now capitalize off of that while doing it through the Olympics, because sports gets shut down for those 2 weeks for the winter games. All eyes around the world will be on it. We know what always comes out of it. It's always typically the US men and women versus the Canadian men and women in the final, but now the world stage is continuing to grow and be a fighting powerhouse with regards to competition. But I think the NHL realizes that if they want to grow their brand, they can't just stay within North America. They have to go elsewhere. And I think this is them trying to take the first step in that direction. And it's going to be a tough one and an interesting one for the exact reasons that Dave laid out. And, at the end of the day, the NHL will probably, and has probably already in this short time. I mean, they were pretty strategic in timing it up with a long weekend announcement by doing this to try and keep some eyeballs off of it and keep the conversation off of it. But at the end of the day, like, they're trying something, and this is an interesting step. Does this now put the eyeballs on the NHL the way it did with how everybody talked about the NBA with the situation with China and the human rights violations and money? Like, is the same conversation going to happen? Is the same narrative going to happen? You can't only talk about it with the NBA if the NHL is now going to allow its players to play in the Olympics in China. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out and what, if any, fallout there is for the NHL with its fans.
But the Toronto Maple Leafs, 2014, I did the story back when I was at the Toronto Star. They were making inroads in China even before the league had a plan to, because for the same reasons you guys laid out, like, this is too big of a market to ignore. And the Leafs, bless their hearts, they would put rink board signs in Chinese at the rink at the arena then known as the Air Canada Center. And that was not for the local fans. That was for people in China watching on CCTV, because the Leafs were able to get themselves on TV on an almost weekly basis in China, despite the fact that they hadn't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. But their goal was to try to become, the Manchester United or the New York Yankees of hockey. So none of this is new, but it is interesting, as both of you pointed out, like the contrast between how this goes over when the NBA wants to go to China and how this goes over when the NHL wants to go to China. Because the NBA goes to China and we over here in North America say, well, why aren't you guys crusading for human rights? LeBron James, why aren't you crusading for human rights? Why are you happy with this? But we have not heard that type of backlash in terms of the NHL going to Beijing. Dave Zirin, how do you think this all ends up at the tail end of the 2022 Olympics?
I'll just say, isn't that the same with so much, whether we're talking about
yes,
it breaks out in the NHL or the NBA? I mean, the double standard that's always existed between these two leagues is a feature, not a bug. And it's inextricably linked to whiteness and the perception thereof, and what is or isn't deemed as antisocial in the context of sports. And the NBA had to literally suffer for that last year in terms of the attention, the criticism, the calling out of individual players as if they're supposed to be in charge of Sino-US relations.
Right.
I mean, ridiculous. Like criticizing James Harden like he should be Richard Holbrook or something. It was off the page ridiculous, and the NHL is able to skate by that comparison. And I'm for both understanding why they're doing it because of the nature of the business, while also saying why shouldn't they be subject to the same scrutiny if we're talking about China. And how it's going to end up when it's all said and done is exactly as we've described. It's going to be the United States and Canada, and it's probably going to garner some good ratings here back home. Whether or not this makes any penetration in China, which is a country, you got to say, is getting increasingly hot from strictly a meteorological perspective. So I want the viability of ice rinks.
Perfect. Meanwhile, the U.S. Open is ongoing. And guys, we promised you tennis. Here's your tennis. I'm sorry we had to push it back last week. Again, blame the public. Don't know nothing about boxing. But here we go. Naomi Osaka loses to Leylah Fernandez. And in the post-match news conference, she says, look, I need a break. I'm paraphrasing her. But she says, when I win a match, I'm relieved. She's not happy, just relieved. And then when she loses the match, she's not happy. She's actively unhappy. And it turns out she's not the only one. Like, apparently this is a thing where a lot of high level tennis players seem to hate their jobs. Now, this to me sounds like a gold mine for the people we talked about before. You know, the people that evaluate NFL draft prospects. And then this guy doesn't love football police come out and say, hey, don't draft him number one. He doesn't love football enough. You know what he has? He has hobbies. How dare you have hobbies outside of, you don't love football enough. And here you have a whole cohort of top professionals saying this sport drives me nuts. Here is Mississauga's Bianca Andreescu in the New York Times. I think with because the New York Times went and they had to go ask about this because apparently this is a trend that we've kind of been ignoring for a long time. Here's Andreescu. I think with anything you're passionate about, it's always a love-hate relationship because you want that thing so bad all the time. You want to be perfect. In my case, it's tennis. Meghan McPeak. How sustainable is it for the pro tennis industry to be built on the back of a group of people who are like, a bunch of them apparently are on the verge of walking away from it all because the sport stresses them out so much?
Not good. Not good to say the least. But I mean, like, you go back to not even 24 hours ago, Shelby Rogers, after her insane upset win over Ash Barty, then loses her next match to Emma, and apologies if I do not pronounce her name correctly, but Emma Raducanu. And the first thing she says is, I'm going to expect death threats, millions of them, for losing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and she said it herself, like a part of her lack of success in that match following this upset was she thinks that she was just not able to emotionally come down and reset for the next match after her upset, which is completely understandable.
Yes.
When you upset one of the best, if not at that time, the best in the world at the US Open, like, how do you come down from that not even 24 hours later to then turn around and continue to play? So the fact that you then hear her say, like, I'm going to expect millions of death threats after this, like, that is the world that these athletes are living in because it's not a team sport. So it's just on them. Mm-hmm. Then you have, Naomi Osaka, who, to her credit, has always and has continued to put her mental health and her well-being ahead of everything, including tennis, to the demise and the disappointment of society. Because let's not talk about mental wellness and mental health because it's not the cool thing to do. But guess what? We have to. Simone Biles, same thing at the Olympics. Her mental health and her physical health, let's be real, because the twisties is a real thing. We've now seen it from the videos she's posted. She put her mental well-being and, most importantly, her physical well-being in front of a gold medal because she could have easily landed on her head and it could have been catastrophic. So the fact that we are now seeing more and more athletes continue to put their well-being ahead of winning, guess what? Suck it up, society. They are human beings. Point blank, period, end of discussion. They are humans. They are not puppets for your entertainment satisfaction. Yes, we pay for cable, we pay for streaming, we pay for tickets to these events. But at the end of the day, at the very core and basic set of being a human, they are humans. They are just professional athletes for their job. Just like Dave is a writer, just like Morgan, you're a writer, just like I'm a broadcaster. At the end of the day, those are our job titles. We are all humans. If they want to put their mental well-being and their health ahead of the job they do, we need to uplift them and support them rather than tear them down and attack them for losing a match or deciding that they want to step away for a time because they want to put themselves in a good mental space. and the mental space that they're in while playing, clearly Naomi Osaka is telling us tennis is miserable for her. Why are we destroying her and tearing her down rather than surrounding her with happiness, love, and support and uplifting her to find out why and how we can put her in a place where she can play tennis and enjoy it? Why? Because we are the ones making her not enjoy it because of how she's treated when she does not have the success we expect of her.
Yeah, it's a nerve-wracking sport, and at the best of times, like even I as a spectator, if there's a person I really want to win, like I cannot sit there and invest myself in every point because it's exhausting and I'm just watching. So I can only imagine how stressful it is when you're that person trying to return that 100-mile-an-hour serve. Plus the sport, like they have a statistic called unforced errors, just to remind you after the game, hey, look at all the times nobody made you messed up. Here, look at this stat sheet. Nobody made unforced. You did it. You screwed up. And I can see how that builds up on a person. And that is like independent of the pressure that we in the mainstream media place on people, and independent of the pressure that social media places on people. And these fans, you know who I really hate is I pay your salary guy, who uses the same argument to pro athletes that they use to school board members. Get out here and play. I don't care if you got a bad knee. I pay your salary. You don't pay anything, bro. You're not buying tickets. Again, you pay attention because you watch on TV. Half of y'all streaming it illegally, so you're not paying anything. You're actually costing her money. She doesn't have to go out here and play to please you. Dave, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that while I agree with everything that Meghan said, I think there's also something very specific about tennis confronted that goes back 40 plus years. And before I say something about that, like keep in mind, like if Cheryl Miller could, she'd be on a WNBA court right now. Tom Brady is playing well into his 40s. It's like with almost every other sport, people have to be carried off the field before they will stop playing. Tennis is the exception to that. Golfers will do their thing until, you got to bring out a defibrillator. But in tennis, you have the all-time greats. Bjorn Borg walks away at 26. John McEnroe walks away at 27. Tracy Austin walks away at 16. And sometimes these folks come back like Jennifer Capriati. Frankly, just thinking about the history of great tennis players and how many have left before they were done physically said something about the mental strain of this sport. And frankly, it gives me an almost awe-inspiring respect for Serena Williams. But one of the things I was thinking about what makes Serena different than, say, a Tracy Austin, who was pushed and pushed and pushed by coaches and by her father to play in every tournament and do everything. It's that Serena has been willing to take control of her own career and her own schedule. And she's able to do that because of her stature and ability. 99% of tennis players do not have that power. And frankly, far too few in the 1% exercise that power. And it would be great if that 1% could try to lead this more collectively and say, the schedule is too arduous. The youth scene is absurd. And the wear and tear is something that we need to think about for the long-term viability of the sport. Because how does it help your sport if your best players are burning out before they're old enough to rent a carpet shampooer? That is not a sport that's built for the long term. And as the pressures of social media, it's like what Bjorn Borg went through, put through a wind tunnel when you factor social media and the other various pressures that exist in 2021. So I think it's tennis that needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror. What Naomi Osaka is doing taking so much courage. It would be great if the tennis world could actually follow that lead and take that same hard look in what they're doing to the people who make us watch, and that's the players.
But you know what I am sure about? I'm sure that In or Out is my favorite part of the week. Thing about this edition of In and Out, like its subject matter, like the main character in and Out, it's slimmed down. Usually we do 3 topics. This week we're just doing one. That topic, you ask, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Remember, he dropped 40 pounds in the offseason, really committed to fitness and to nutrition, and got some help from his grandmother because his grandmother apparently is a great cook. And so she was part of the reason he was too heavy. And then she also became part of the solution. Right? Helped him control portion size, helped him with his macros, as Meghan likes to talk about, his macronutrients. And he hit spring training down from 270 or whatever it was. Now he's a solid 225. He's ready to go. Heading into the final weeks of the regular season, here's Vladimir Guerrero Jr. leading the American League in batting as of Tuesday morning, batting 321. And again, this is historically, batting averages league-wide are at an all-time low. So for him to be leading the league at 321, that's like 350 in a normal year. He is ranked third in the American League in home runs. He has 40. Shohei Ohtani has 43. And he is ranked fourth in runs batted in with 98. Jose Abreu, I think, has 103. Dave Zirin, are you in or out on svelte Vladimir Guerrero Jr. winning a Triple Crown this season?
Oh, out, because Shohei Ohtani is Shohei Ohtani. But I can just sneak in a little bit that Major League Baseball has Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette on the same team and doesn't seem to know what to do with the fact rock stars on one team. And I swear, if I gave Rob Manfred a suitcase full of money, he'd say, great, now I can start a campfire. What to do with this? And that is enraging to me.
That is the most MLB thing ever, though, right?
It's enraging.
And then on the back end to complain that they can't engage younger people, and then to try to solve that problem by partnering with a website that has a long track record of racism and sexism, and they think that's how they're going to get younger viewers. These people are clueless. Meghan McPeak, you in or out on Vlad Guerrero winning the Triple Crown?
I'm out for the same reasons Dave said. Shohei Ohtani, like something miraculous would have to happen. And I don't wish injuries on anyone. But if I may, one of our first early episodes.
Yes.
This was an in or out question.
Yep.
Are we in or
on
out
whether
on
he'd hit
Vlad
40
Jr.
home runs? Yeah.
Hitting 40 or more? Guess who was the only one who said she was in on it? And
Boom.
Y'all thought I was crazy.
Yes.
I was crazy.
Megstradamus. She strikes again.
Megstradamus.
She strikes again. For me, I'm out for a different reason. One, I was just about 8 years ago, nine years ago, I was in Venezuela on assignment the week that Miguel Cabrera was about to win the Triple Crown. And that story, and this was in the middle of an election, right? And this was not like stories, this was not headlines like 1 and 2. It was 1 and 1A. Triple Crown election. And this was a very contentious election. High voter turnout, everything. 1 and 1A. So Miguel Cabrera almost bumped Chavez versus Capitalez off the front page of every newspaper in that country. That's how seriously they take it now. We in Canada would never take the Triple Crown that seriously, but back where Vlad Jr. is from, well, he was born in Montreal, but you know what I mean, where he grew up in the Dominican Republic, this story would be just as big. The problem is not Shohei Ohtani. And here's the reason why I'm out on Vlad Jr. winning the Triple Crown. The problem is Vlad Jr. and Marcus Semien. He's not going to get enough RBIs. Like Vlad Jr. conceivably could erupt one weekend and hit 4 home runs in one weekend and overtake Shohei Ohtani. But because he can do that, the person batting in front of him, Marcus Semien, gets all kinds of good pitches because every pitcher in the league is like, look, man, I can't afford to put Marcus Semien on base for Vlad Jr. to come hit a double and drive him in. So I'm just going to challenge Marcus Semien because I got to challenge him because I can't mess around. I can't take a chance on walking him. So Marcus Semien just gets all these fastballs because everybody's scared to pitch to Vlad Jr. So whenever there are people on base ahead of Marcus Semien, they still challenge Marcus Semien because they don't want to let Vlad Jr. beat them. And Marcus Semien is racking up all these RBIs, 36 home runs, because people are scared to death of Vlad Jr. And Vlad Jr. still does what he does, but he just often is hitting with empty bases. And so that's the main thing that's going to stop Vlad Jr. But he has, if you measure Triple Crown by batting average, home runs, and OPS, Vlad Jr. is your guy. But in the meantime, Vlad Jr. is going to stop Vlad Jr. from achieving a traditional Triple Crown, which, listen, take all the credit you can, Vlad Jr. You got it's like you got like an honorary Triple Crown, because again, the only person that stopped you is you, and you didn't stop yourself by being not good enough to get a Triple Crown. You stopped yourself by you're literally too good to get a Triple Crown. What can you do? But you know what else is too good?
This panel.
My teammates.
Okay.
My panel in Washington, D.C. Meghan McPeak, between now and next week. And the good thing about having 8 days between the last episodes is that we'll get like 6 days between the next episode. But between now and then, where can the people find you?
As always, on Twitter at Meghan McPeak, spelled with an H because it's the right way to do it.
Perfect. Dave Zirin, where can they find you?
On the Twitters at Edge of Sports. Got a book coming out in a week. If you buy it and say I heard about it on Bring It In, I promise I will, I don't know, give you honorary Canadian citizenship. I got to do something. But Canadian green card, shoot, that might make a bestseller here in the United States. I'll think it through. I'll think it through.
Perfect. At least send them a bag of ketchup chips, Dave. You know. And as for me, I'm your host, Morgan Campbell. You can find me on Twitter at Morgan P. Campbell, on Instagram at Morgan P. Campbell. I'm not on Facebook, Triller, or TikTok. If you like what you heard, hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment. If you dislike what you heard, hit dislike, leave a nasty comment. We don't care. I don't read the comments anyway, to tell you the truth. I just count them. You're here to feed the algorithm. Been in this social media game too long to read. Remember Macklemore, Same Love? And he's like, if I was gay, I would think hip hop hates me. Have you read the YouTube comments lately? I'm like, Macklemore, why the hell do you read YouTube comments? What the hell is wrong with you, man? Anyway, I don't read the comments, but leave them anyway. Yes, so until then, I have been your host, Morgan Campbell. We will see y'all next week with more Bring It In with Morgan Campbell.